"Undress. I want to see the truth," Mafia boss said as she hid her broken ribs from him. The air in Eastbrook was a soggy, wet blanket clinging to the skin with the grime of the city. August had choked the streets in a heat wave that refused to break, and the night shift offered no relief. Inside the rusty nail, the air conditioning was a distant memory. The atmosphere was a thick stew of stale beer, old frying oil, and the faint, sweet rot of the drain beneath the floorboards. Lena Marlowe moved through it like a phantom. She wore a black, long-sleeved turtleneck, a decision so absurd in the sweltering bar that it screamed louder than any visible mark could have. Sweat gathered at her hairline and trickled down the back of her neck. But she didn't roll up the sleeves. She kept her eyes down, fixed on the murky glasses she polished, the sticky countertops she wiped, the small, safe circles of her immediate tasks. She was a creature of calculated invisibility. She had perfected the art of being present but unseen, of answering in murmurs, of deflecting with silence, when the jukebox, a relic of a bygone decade, suddenly roared to life with a blast of guitar. Her shoulders shot up to her ears, a violent, automatic flinch. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the sharp, specific ache beneath the layers, and forced her muscles to unlock. The bar held its usual collection of ghosts, old men nursing cheap whiskey, a few younger factory guys laughing too loudly, their bravado echoing off the peeling wallpaper. Lena navigated them, her tray a shield, her face a polite, blank mask. The bell above the door chimed, a dull, tinny sound, and a different kind of silence fell. It wasn't an abrupt stop, but a gradual thickening of the air, a muting of the laughter, a sudden focus. Dante Morelli entered. He didn't stride in. He simply appeared, flanked by two men who were built like bespoke brick walls, their suits as dark and sharp as his. Dante himself was a study in lethal refinement. His suit was a charcoal gray, so fine it seemed to drink the dim light of the bar. He wore no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone, revealing nothing. His black hair was short, severe, and his face was all hard angles and disciplined planes, as if carved from unforgiving stone. He moved to the back booth, the one that was perpetually empty, the vinyl uncracked, and slid in. His men took the adjacent table, facing the room, their stillness more menacing than any threat. Dante did not order. He did not look at a menu. He simply watched the room, his eyes a flat, cold gray, the color of the city's river in winter. Lena felt the stare, even though she wasn't looking. It was a physical pressure, a weight on her skin. She kept her back to him, her hands trembling slightly as she restocked the cocktail napkins. She knew who he was. Everyone in Eastbrook knew. You didn't own a string of import-export businesses and nightclubs without garnering a reputation. The Morellis were the city's quiet royalty, the ones the police pretended not to see, the ones who handled their own problems with a finality that left no room for appeal. He was dangerous, but he was a different kind of danger from the one she lived with. A thick, beefy hand clamped down on her arm. "Hey, sweetheart, where's that smile?" Lena froze. It was Big Jim, a regular who always stayed one drink too long. His fingers dug into her bicep, and she fought the urge to cry out, the pressure jarring the bruised muscles of her shoulder. "Please, sir, I have other tables," she whispered, trying to pull away. Her practiced, brittle smile was glued in place. "Ah, come on," he slurred, yanking her closer. "Just one smile for old Jim, a real one." Lena's breath hitched. She could feel the heat of his gaze, the unwelcome intimacy of his grip. She was so tired of being touched. And then, the pressure was gone. Big Jim's face had gone pale, his eyes wide, fixed on something over her shoulder. He released her arm so quickly he almost fell off his stool. "Sorry," he mumbled, not to her, but to the air. "My mistake. Just the check." He fumbled in his pocket, threw a wad of cash on the bar, and scrambled out the door. His drink left half full. Lena rubbed her arm, her heart hammering. She turned, slowly. Dante Morelli was watching her. He hadn't moved. His hands were clasped on the table. He hadn't spoken, hadn't stood. He had simply looked. His icy glare had been enough. She owed him. The rules of her survival demanded she acknowledge the act. She walked over, her legs feeling like lead. She stopped a few feet from his table, keeping her eyes fixed on the salt shaker. "Thank you." Her voice was barely a whisper. "He won't bother you again." It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a low, gravelly voice that vibrated in the air. Silence stretched. She should leave. Go back to the bar, but his gaze held her pinned. "What's your name?" Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She could not give him her name. Travis had ears everywhere. If he heard she was talking to a man like Dante Morelli, he would see it as a betrayal, as a challenge. The consequences were unthinkable. She had to lie. "Sarah," she said. The name tasted like ash on her tongue. Simple, plain, forgettable. He watched her for a long, assessing moment. She could feel his intelligence, his skepticism, a flicker of something, not quite amusement, but a dry, knowing acknowledgement, touched the corner of his mouth, a tiny smirk that vanished as quickly as it came. He knew. "Sarah," he repeated, the name sounding foreign in his mouth. "Good night." It was a dismissal. Lena fled back to the safety of her bar, her back prickling, feeling his eyes on her until the very last second. Closing time was 2:30 in the morning. She wiped the last table, emptied the last ashtray, and locked the heavy front door behind her, the series of clicks echoing in the empty street. Her apartment was 8 blocks away, 8 blocks of deserted sidewalks, humming streetlights, and the skittering of unseen things in dark alleys. She pulled her thin jacket tighter, lacing her keys between her fingers, the sharp metal a pathetic, familiar comfort. She was halfway home when she heard it, the low, heavy idle of a car. She glanced over her shoulder. A dark sedan, its headlights off, was cruising slowly, keeping pace with her from across the street. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird slamming against her ribs. Oh God, oh no. She sped up, her worn sneakers pounding the pavement. The car sped up. She ducked into a side street. The car turned, its engine growling. This was it. Travis had finally tired of his game and sent someone to finish it. Tears of terror pricked her eyes. She wouldn't let them. She saw the narrow gap between the all-night laundromat and the closed-down bodega. It was a shortcut, barely wide enough for a person, choked with garbage and shadows, but it was her only chance. She darted into the darkness, ignoring the sharp pain that lanced through her side. She ran, her lungs burning, the sound of her own ragged breath deafening. She didn't look back, pushing through the metallic taste of fear, and didn't stop until she was at her own apartment building. Her hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with the 3 locks on her door. She fell inside, slamming it shut, sliding the chain, and collapsing against the wood, gasping for air, safe. For now. Her apartment was a small, clean box. It was her fortress and her prison. After a long moment, she pushed herself upright and went to the bathroom, the only room with a door she trusted. She turned on the shower, the rush of water a necessary camouflage, and locked the door. She stood in front of the cracked mirror, her reflection a stranger's, a pale, haunted face with eyes too big. Slowly, painfully, she began the ritual. She peeled the damp turtleneck over her head, her breath hissing between her teeth as the fabric brushed against her side. She unwrapped the binding she'd wound tightly around her torso. It wasn't a sports bra. It was a full ace bandage, meant to keep everything still, to keep the broken pieces from shifting. She unwound it, loop by loop, until her skin was bare under the harsh fluorescent light. The truth was a grotesque, colorful map of her pain. Her left side, from her ribs down to her hip, was a sickening swirl of deep purple, sickly yellow, and an angry, swollen blue. The older bruises, from 2 weeks ago, were fading. But the new ones, the ones on her ribs, were dark and terrifying. 3 days ago, he'd been drinking, found a text from her cousin asking if she was okay. He had accused her of cheating, of plotting. He hadn't hit her face. He always knew she had to work. He had waited until she was on the floor. He had kicked her. Once. Twice. 3 times. "This is so you remember." He'd panted, his voice thick with rage and something she used to mistake for love. "This is so you remember who you belong to." She had crawled to this same bathroom, had bandaged herself, had gone to work the next day. Lena pressed a finger gently to the worst of the swelling. A sharp, searing pain made her gasp, and she leaned against the sink, spots dancing in her vision. Her phone, charging on the sink counter, buzzed, one new voicemail. She didn't need to look. She knew the number, she knew the voice, but she had to listen. Not listening was its own crime, one that carried a heavier sentence. She pressed play. Lena, his voice, Travis's voice, was oily, possessive. "I called twice. You think you can just ignore me? You think I don't know what you're doing, working at that trash heap, with those animals staring at you? You're mine. Lena, you forget that. I'll have to remind you." The jealousy was a thick, choking thing. "I'll remind you so you never, ever forget again." The line clicked. Lena slid down the wall, her bare back hitting the cold tile, and wrapped her arms around her knees, protecting her broken ribs. She stayed there, shivering in the steam, until the water ran cold. Miles away, a black Bentley glided through the sleeping city, its interior silent as a tomb. "Home, boss?" Nico asked. His eyes on the road, Dante Morelli stared out the window, the city's dim lights painting fleeting patterns on his stone-still face. "The waitress at the bar," he said, his voice low. "The one who calls herself Sarah." Nico's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, find out who she is." He paused, his gaze tracking a lone figure sleeping in a doorway. "And who she's running from. She looks like a ghost." He turned his head, his gray eyes fixing on his driver's. "I've seen scared. I've seen hurt. This is different. This is cornered. Find out who cornered her." That night, Lena's fitful sleep was filled with water. It was dark, cold, pulling her down. The filth of Eastbrook's river filled her mouth, her lungs. She was drowning, the weight of her own life too heavy to bear. Her ribs were on fire, each attempt to swim a fresh agony. Then, a hand. It was strong, warm, and it wrapped around her wrist. It didn't yank. It didn't grab. It just held, pulling her up, steady and firm against the crushing weight of the water. She surfaced, gasping, coughing. She looked up at her rescuer. The man was all shadows, a faceless silhouette against a bruised sky. All shadows, except for his eyes. They were gray, cold but not cruel. The color of a winter sky, promising nothing but seeing everything. She woke up with a start, her own name a silent scream on her lips. The next evening, she arrived at the bar an hour early. She needed the money. She needed to pretend everything was normal. The pain in her side was a dull, constant throb, a reminder of what was real. She unlocked the front door, the smell of stale beer washing over her. She froze. He was there. Dante Morelli, sitting in the same back booth, in the dark, as if he had never left. Lena's hand flew to her throat, her fingers brushing the high collar of her fresh turtleneck. Her keys dropped from her other hand, an explosive clatter in the silence. We're not open," she stammered. "Not for another hour." He stood, emerging from the shadow. He didn't loom. He simply occupied the space, drawing all the light and air toward him. "I know." His voice filled the empty room, leaving no space for her to breathe. He took a step toward her. She took an involuntary step back, her hand fumbling for the doorknob. He stopped, a respectful, calculated 10 feet away. He wasn't a man who moved by accident. "Why did you lie about your name? Lena?" "Not Sarah. Lena." Her blood turned to ice water, her stomach to stone. He knew. He knew her name. How could he know her name? This was Travis. This was a trap. He was working for Travis, or Travis was working for him. It was all the same. She was caught. I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice trembling. His gray eyes swept over her, taking in the terror, the high-necked shirt, the way she was poised for flight. He didn't move closer. "I don't care who you were," he said, his voice softer now, but no less intense, cutting through her panic. "I want to know who you are now." Lena's entire body was a shield, her voice. When she finally found it, was thin and brittle. "I have to open the bar. Please, I have work to do." She expected him to push, to threaten, to use the knowledge of her real name as leverage. Men in her life, starting with Travis, always wanted something. They used what they knew to break pieces off you. Dante Morelli simply inclined his head. "The lights," he said, gesturing to the main breaker. "You should turn them on." He went back to his booth and sat. He didn't order. He didn't speak. He just watched her, a silent, unsettling guardian in the gloom. Lena fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so hard it took 3 tries to unlock the cash register. She flipped the switches, and the bars dim. Amber lights flickered to life, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. They did nothing to dispel the shadow sitting in the back. She worked that entire shift with his presence burning a hole in her back. He stayed for 3 hours, drank a single cup of black coffee, and left. When Lena cleared his table, she found a $100 bill tucked under the saucer. She stared at it, her heart a cold knot. It wasn't a tip. It was a statement. It was a purchase of... what? Information, her? She tried to refuse his help, though he had not explicitly offered any. She told herself his interest was dangerous, that he was a predator, just like Travis, only with better suits and a quieter voice. But a traitorous part of her couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. "I want to know who you are now." It echoed in her head, a strange counter-rhythm to Travis's constant, grinding, "You're mine." Travis defined her by his ownership. This new, cold man had, in one sentence, acknowledged her as a person separate from her past. He was the only man who had ever made her feel seen without laying a single finger on her. Travis saw her as a possession to be used and broken. The drunks at the bar saw her as a pair of legs and a tray. Dante Morelli. He looked at her like he was reading a complicated, coded message, and he was patient enough to decipher it. His visits became a pattern. He came in every other night, always after 10, always taking the back booth. He never flirted. He never tried to make small talk or asked her to sit. He just nursed a coffee or a short glass of whiskey and watched. His men, his shadows, sat nearby, their presence a silent, armored perimeter, and he tipped, the $100 bills piled up. Lena put them in a separate envelope under her mattress, untouched. It felt like blood money, but she didn't know whose. She tried to avoid him. She sent the other waitress, a young, gum-snapping girl named Chloe, to his table. Chloe would return, flushed and flustered. "He's creepy. Lena," she'd whisper, fanning herself. "He just stares. And when I brought his drink, he just looked at me and said, 'Send the other one.' I mean, rude, but God, that tip." Lena would sigh, pick up her tray, and walk into the lion's den, her ribs aching with every step. The watching. That was the worst part. It wasn't a lecherous stare. It was an assessment. He watched the way she flinched when the cook dropped a pan. He watched the way her hands trembled when she counted change. He watched the way her smile was a thin, brittle thing she wore like armor. He was waiting. She didn't know for what, but the patience unnerved her more than any advance would have. Then, the night came when her two worlds collided. It was a Tuesday, usually slow, but the bar was half full. Lena was rushing, her sides screaming in protest, a fresh, sharp pain from where she'd stumbled on the broken sidewalk that morning. The front door slammed open, banging against the wall, and the entire bar went quiet. It wasn't Dante's quiet. It was a sharp, indrawn breath. Travis stood there, his police-issued jacket unzipped over a stained T-shirt, his face flushed with whiskey and rage, his eyes small and mean, scanned the room and locked onto her. "Lena!" he bellowed, and the name was a whip crack. Lena froze, a glass mid-polish in her hand. She felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin cold and clammy. "Travis," she said, her voice a dead thing. "You shouldn't be here." "I shouldn't be here?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound, and stalked toward the bar. Patrons hunched over their drinks, suddenly fascinated by the labels on their beer bottles. "I go where I want, and you? You're talking to people you shouldn't be." He reached the bar. His smell, stale booze, sweat, and an acrid metallic tang of fury washing over her. "What's this I hear?" he sneered, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You've been talking to Italians, Lena? You think that's smart? You think some Guinea gangster is going to save you?" He was close now, leaning over the bar, trapping her against the back counter. "It's just customers. Travis, I'm a waitress," she said, her voice shaking, her eyes pleading with him. "Not here. Please. Not here. Don't you lie to me." He slammed his fist on the bar, and the glasses rattled. "You're mine. You think I let my property talk to—" He looked up, and for the first time, he saw the back booth. He saw Dante Morelli sitting in the shadows, watching them with a profound, reptilian stillness. Travis's face purpled. It was a territorial challenge he couldn't ignore. "You!" he yelled, pointing a thick finger at Dante. "You like my girl? You like my sloppy seconds?" Dante didn't move. He didn't blink. Travis, enraged by the lack of reaction, turned his fury back to the easier target. He lunged, his hand hooking around Lena's arm, and yanked her hard against the wooden lip of the bar. "Get in the back," he hissed, his fingers digging in, bruising. "We're leaving." "Travis, no, I'm working," she cried, the pain in her arm eclipsed by the agonizing pressure on her ribs as they were crushed against the bar. She tasted bile, the world graying at the edges. "Now—" She pretended to stumble, using the moment to regain her footing, to put on the mask. Okay, she said, her voice falsely bright, placating. "Just let me get my purse. I'll be right out." She manufactured a laugh, a high, tinkling sound of pure terror. "You're always so impatient." Travis stared at her, his eyes narrowed, searching for the lie. But this was a dance they'd done 1,000 times. He liked the performance of control. He grunted, releasing her arm, shoving her slightly. 5 minutes, or I come in and drag you out." He straightened his jacket, shot one last, hate-filled glare at Dante, and stormed out the front door, letting it slam shut. The bar was deathly silent. Lena stood, trembling, rubbing her arm, her entire body a single, vibrating nerve of pain and humiliation. She kept her eyes down, her hair falling forward to hide her face. Dante Morelli watched her for a 10 count. He saw the imprint of fingers on her arm. He saw the sheen of sweat on her forehead. He saw the superhuman effort it took for her to unclench her fists and pick up the rag she had dropped. He stood, dropped a 20 on the table for his coffee, and walked out. He and his men were gone. He had done nothing. The drive back to his penthouse was silent. Nico drove, his eyes checking the rearview mirror, waiting. Finally, Dante spoke, his voice a low, lethal hum, devoid of all emotion. "The man who was here, the one who touched her." "Travis Miller," Nico supplied instantly. "Eastbrook PD, thinks he's a big shot. Sloppy, drinks, likes to use his hands. We've been observing." Dante looked at his reflection in the tinted window, the city's lights blurred across his cold face. "No badge protects a man like that from me," he said, the words as final as a eulogy. "I want everything on him, every complaint that was buried, every witness who was scared off, every dollar he took. I want his whole dirty life on my desk." He turned to Nico, his gray eyes flat and hard as diamonds. "And do it quietly. She's a deer in a snare. We make one loud noise, and she'll break her own neck trying to get away." Lena felt like she was suffocating. She started avoiding Dante. When his car pulled up, she'd hide in the kitchen or the restroom. She couldn't face the questions in his eyes. She couldn't bear his quiet, assessing pity. She knew Travis was watching. His calls became more frequent, his texts a constant, buzzing threat in her pocket. He knew about the tips from Dante. He had eyes everywhere. He demanded the money. Lena lied and said she'd spent it on rent. The lie earned her a slew of new, vile threats. One night after her shift, she was digging in her purse for her keys, and her fingers brushed against something small, plastic and cold, stuck to the bottom lining. She pulled it out. It was a small, black square, no bigger than a quarter, with a magnetic back, a GPS tracker. She dropped it as if it were a spider. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. He had been tracking her. For how long? He knew. He knew every step she took. from the bar to her apartment, from her apartment to the grocery store. He knew she hadn't been anywhere else. But she could have. And he would have known that, too. The violation was absolute. It was a digital leash, a way to keep her chained even when he wasn't there. She looked at the small, black square, and all she could see was his face, his smile. She flushed it down the toilet, her hand shaking, but it didn't matter. The message had been sent. You can never leave. A week later, the sky opened. A brutal, late summer storm slammed into Eastbrook, turning the streets into churning, ankle-deep rivers. The wind howled, rattling the windows of the Rusty Nail, and by closing time, the city was a dark, flooded mess. "You ain't walking in this, Lena." Her boss, a kind, tired man named Sal, said, "It's a hurricane out there. Let me call you a cab." "No, Sal, I'm fine. It's just water," she lied, forcing a smile. A cab was a luxury, one that would be reported back to Travis, one that would imply she had extra money she was hiding. She wrapped her thin jacket around herself, a pathetic defense, and stepped out into the deluge. The water was cold, instantly soaking through her worn-out sneakers, plastering her jeans to her legs. The wind tore at her, a physical blow. She put her head down and walked, one foot in front of the other, the pain in her ribs, which had been a dull ache, sharpened with every cold, gasping breath. 4 blocks from home, her body gave out, the cold, the exhaustion, the pain, the constant grinding fear. It all crested at once. Her vision tunneled, her knees buckled. She didn't fall gracefully. She collapsed, a marionette with her strings cut, landing on her hands and knees in the gutter. The filthy, rushing water splashing her face. She tried to get up, but she couldn't. She had nothing left. She was so tired. She knelt there, the rain plastering her hair to her skull, and for the first time in years, she just stopped. Headlights, high and bright, cut through the rain, blinding her. They stopped, and a car door opened and slammed. She heard the heavy, sure footsteps splashing toward her. A long, black wool coat entered her field of vision. "Get up," a low voice commanded. She looked up. Rain streamed down her face, into her open mouth. Dante Morelli stood over her, a man carved from the storm itself. He wasn't even wet, as if the rain was afraid to touch him. "I can't," she whispered. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't coo or console. He simply bent down, slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The motion was so sudden, so fluid, that a scream of agony tore from her throat as her broken ribs were jostled. She arched in his arms, her vision flashing white. His grip tightened, his body tensing at her scream. "Hospital," he bit out, striding toward the sleek black car idling at the curb. "No," she gasped, grabbing the lapel of his coat, her voice a desperate, terrified plea. "No hospital, please, God, no. He'll find me. He checks. He has friends. No hospital." Dante paused, his hand on the car door, the rain sluicing off his face. He looked down at her panicked, pleading eyes. He saw the truth there, the raw, animal terror that went beyond just being hurt. "Please," she sobbed, the fight finally gone, her head falling against his chest. "Just not there. Anywhere but there." He held her for a long, still moment, the storm raging around them. Then, without a word, he put her in the passenger seat, stalked around the car, and got in the driver's seat. Nico was, for once, not present. The car was silent, warm, and smelled of leather and something clean and metallic. Lena shivered, leaving a puddle on the fine leather seat. He didn't drive her home. He drove past her neighborhood, past the rotting heart of Eastbrook, and up into the hills, where the houses became fortresses, hidden behind gates and trees. He pulled into a subterranean garage, and the world went silent and dry. He came around, opened her door, and simply waited, shaking, humiliated. She used the door to pull herself to her feet. He didn't touch her. He just walked to an elevator, and she followed. A wet, broken stray. His penthouse was empty. It was vast, a cavern of glass, steel, and dark wood, with a view of the entire storm-lashed city below. But it was sterile. There were no photos, no clutter, Just lines, space, and a silence so profound it rang in her ears. "The guest bathroom is through there," he said, pointing. "There are clothes. Leave yours outside the door. I'll have them. Taken care of." He walked away, toward the wall of glass, leaving her alone. The bathroom was bigger than her entire apartment. It was all black marble and chrome. She locked the door, a reflex, and stared at herself in the mirror. She was a ghost, a drowned rat. Her hair was matted, her face chalk white, her lips blue. Her eyes were just dark, empty holes. She looked, she realized, like a victim. With trembling, numb fingers, she peeled off her wet clothes, the denim of her jeans a heavy, cold skin. She left them in a pathetic pile by the door. She turned on the hot shower and stood under the scalding spray, her body shaking in violent, uncontrollable tremors. She washed the grime of the street, the smell of Travis, the humiliation of the collapse, off her skin. When she got out, she saw the clothes he'd left on the counter, a pair of soft gray sweatpants and a thick black t-shirt. They were his. She pulled them on, the soft cotton a shocking comfort. The shirt hung to her knees, the sweatpants ridiculously long. She rolled them up. And then she saw her side. The fall in the street had done new damage. The bruising was darker, angrier, the swelling more pronounced. A new, sharp pain radiated from just under her breast. It was worse. It was much worse. In her purse, which he must have retrieved from the gutter. She found her small tin of ointment. She opened it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the lid off. She dipped her fingers in and began to apply it, her breath hissing, her face contorting in a mask of pain. She was so focused on the ritual, on the pain, on the simple animal act of tending to her own wounds, that she didn't hear him. A soft knock on the door made her jump, a small cry escaping her lips. "Lena?" His voice was low, muffled by the heavy wood. "There's food ready. You can eat or you can sleep. The room across the hall is yours." He paused, and his next words were clearer, more deliberate, as if he knew she was standing right against the door. "No one touches you here." That night, she couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet. She lay there, listening to the rain on the glass, her ribs a galaxy of pain. She slipped out of the room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. The apartment was dark, the city lights below a distant, glittering carpet. She found him in the kitchen. He was standing in the dark, looking out the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was just a silhouette, broad-shouldered and still. He knew she was there, but he didn't turn. "You can't sleep either," he stated. It wasn't a question. "No," she whispered, pulling the collar of his t-shirt up to her chin. They stood in the dark, two solitary figures, the silence stretching, filled only by the fading storm. Finally. He turned his head, his profile sharp against the city lights. He asked the question that had been hanging in the air since the moment he'd found her in the bar. "What did he do to you?" Lena's throat closed. She wrapped her arms around her own waist, a protective, familiar gesture. Her voice was a ragged, broken thing. "You don't want to know." He turned his body fully to face her, his gray eyes unreadable in the dark, but she could feel their intensity. "You're wrong," he said. His voice so soft it was almost a whisper, but it cut through all her defenses, all her lies. "I want to know everything. I want to know everything." The words hung in the vast, silent darkness of the kitchen, a stark contrast to the chaos of her life. Lena stared at him, at this man who was a living shadow, and for the first time, she did not see a threat. She saw an anchor. She saw the faceless man with the gray eyes who had pulled her from the water in her dream. She did not tell him everything. Not then. She could not. The story was a poison she was terrified to pass on. But she whispered, "He's a cop." Dante's expression did not change, but the stillness in him became something heavier, something metallic and cold. He knew. She realized. He had known, or at least suspected. The way Travis had bellowed in the bar, the way he'd thrown his authority around. It was the signature of a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. "I know," Dante said. He did not ask for a name. He did not need to. He crossed the small distance between them and took the glass she was still clutching, her knuckles white. "You're shaking," he said. He placed the glass on the granite counter. "You need to sleep. The guest room. Go." It was a command, but it was not cruel. It was the command of a man taking charge of a situation that was long past her control. Lena went. She slept in the soft, strange bed, and for the first time in 4 years, she did not dream of Travis. She did not dream of drowning. She dreamed of nothing at all. She stayed for 3 days. The storm was the excuse. The roads were flooded, her building's power was out, but the real reason was the silence. Dante's penthouse was a fortress, not just of steel and glass, but of quiet. Here, the world was held at bay. Dante was a ghost. He would be gone when she woke. The only sign of his presence, a fresh pot of coffee brewing in the kitchen. She would find food in the refrigerator, things she hadn't eaten in years, fresh fruit, real bread, cartons of orange juice. She ate. At first, like a bird. Small, frightened bites, but hunger, once acknowledged, became a ravenous thing. She was starving, and not just for food. She ate. She ate more. The t-shirt he'd given her was clean, along with a few other identical ones and pairs of sweatpants, left folded outside her door while she showered. She lived in his borrowed clothes, which smelled of expensive detergent and nothing else. They smelled of safety. On the 3rd morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds. She found him on the balcony. It was a vast terrace that wrapped around the building, the wind cold and clean, high above the city's grime. He was in a dark suit, no tie, holding a small cup of espresso. She hesitated, a creature of the shadows, feeling the sunlight on her skin like a physical touch. She was still wearing his black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, her hair a wild, tangled mess from sleep, her feet bare on the cold stone. He heard her, or sensed her, and turned. His gray eyes swept over her, taking in the messy hair, the bare feet, the shirt that hung off her thin frame. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered in their depths. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, wrapping her arms around her middle, a reflexive gesture of protection, though the ache in her ribs had dulled to a deep, persistent throb. He retrieved a mug, poured her a cup from a thermal carafe, and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. His were warm, his touch calloused and dry. An electric jolt, small but sharp, shot up her arm. She flinched, pulling her hand back too quickly, and coffee sloshed over the rim. "I'm sorry," she whispered, mortified. "It's just coffee, Lena." He took the mug from her, his grip steadying hers, and guided it back into her hands. "Drink." They stood there, side by side, looking out over Eastbrook. The city looked almost beautiful from this height, the river a silver ribbon, the scars of the streets invisible. A passionate, unspoken tension brewed between them. It was a thick, heavy thing, made of his silence, her fear, and a terrifying, magnetic pull she could not name. He was so still. He was the stillest person she had ever met. Travis was all motion and noise, a constant explosion of needs and rages. Dante was contained, a singularity. She shivered in the wind. He turned to her. "You should go back," he said. Her heart plummeted. It was over, the safety, the quiet, the food. He was kicking her out. "Oh, yes. Of course. I'll get my—" "No," he interrupted, his voice edged with an unfamiliar impatience. "You should go back to sleep. You're exhausted, but I can't keep you here. Lena, not like this. He'll escalate. He'll escalate anyway," she said, the words out before she could stop them. "He'll see my absence as a crime. It doesn't matter what I do." He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "Then I'll take you home." Home was a cruel joke. He drove her in the black Bentley, the same car she had collapsed in front of. The streets were clear now, the city returning to its grimy, broken self. He pulled up a block from her apartment, the car's engine a deep, purring thrum. "I'll have Nico watch the building," he said. It wasn't a question. "You don't have to." "Yes," he said. "I do." She opened the door, but hesitated. She looked at his profile, the hard jaw, the straight nose, the unyielding set of his mouth. Dante. It was the first time she had said his name aloud. It felt heavy on her tongue. He turned to look at her, his full attention a physical weight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the coffee. For everything." He nodded once. She got out, and the car did not move until she had rounded the corner. She felt his eyes on her. Even when the car was out of sight, her apartment was a violation. The moment she put her key in the lock, she knew. The top lock, the one she'd paid a locksmith $200 to install, the one Travis didn't know about, was broken. The wood of the door frame was splintered. She pushed the door open, her heart a cold, dead stone in her chest. He had trashed it. It wasn't just robbery. It was rage. It was a personal, hateful destruction. The cushions on her second-hand couch were slashed, the stuffing pulled out like guts. The cheap television she'd bought was face down on the floor, the screen a spiderweb of cracks. In the kitchen, there was flour and broken eggs on the floor. But it was her bedroom that made her sick. He had found the envelope of money. Dante's money. It was gone, of course. But he had taken her clothes, her few dresses, her sweaters, and shredded them. And he had taken a picture, the one of her and her mother who had passed 5 years ago. Her only picture. And he had smashed the glass and written on her mother's face with a black marker. The word was simple: whore. Lena sank to the floor, her legs giving out, and the sob that ripped out of her was not a sound of sadness. It was a sound of absolute, hollowed-out despair. He had taken the last clean thing she had. She didn't know how long she sat there, amidst the wreckage of her life. An hour, 2. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Are you all right?" She stared at it. Dante. It had to be. Her fingers, numb and clumsy. Typed back. He was here. 2 minutes later, the unknown number was calling. She answered. "Where are you?" Dante's voice was a flat, cold line. "In my apartment. Stay there. Lock what you can. I'm 5 minutes away." She heard a car door slam over the line before he hung up. She did as she was told, pushing the ruined couch in front of the broken door. She sat on the floor and waited, shaking. He didn't knock. She heard his voice, low and commanding, outside the door. And then the sound of the couch being pushed aside as if it weighed nothing. Dante stepped in, followed by Nico. They stopped, their dark, expensive suits a stark, absurd contrast to the squalor. They took in the room, their faces unreadable. Nico let out a low whistle. He did a number on the place. "Boss." Dante's eyes were not on the room. They were on Lena, on her pale, tear-streaked face, on the way she was huddled against the wall like a half-dead animal. He walked over to her, ignoring the broken glass on the floor, and crouched in front of her. He didn't touch her. "Did he touch you?" he asked, his voice rough. She shook her head, unable to speak. "Good." He stood, his jaw set so hard a muscle jumped. "Nico, get her a bag. Get whatever's left. Clothes, toiletries, whatever wasn't touched." "Boss?" Nico looked confused. "She's not staying here," Dante said, his voice a blade. He looked at Lena. "You don't go back there. You stay here." Here meant his penthouse. "No," Lena said, finding her voice, a raw, ragged thing. "No, Dante, you don't understand. This is what he does. If I run to you, he'll come after you. He'll use his badge. Let him," Dante said, his voice flat. "You can't buy him off," she cried, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in her throat. "You can't fix this. You can't fix me with money." Dante moved so fast she didn't have time to flinch. He was in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. He forced her to look at him, his gray eyes burning into hers. "I'm not trying to fix you," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl that vibrated through her. "I'm not trying to buy him. I'm trying to keep you breathing." His words hit her harder than a slap. "I'm trying to keep you breathing." The fight drained out of her, leaving her limp. He was right. She was not living. She was just breathing. Barely. "Okay," she whispered. They were back in the penthouse. It was night. The city lights glittered below, a cold, beautiful galaxy. Nico had dropped them off and disappeared. Lena stood in the center of the vast living room, holding the single duffel bag that contained the salvaged, non-ruined pieces of her life. She was still wearing the same clothes she'd had on that morning. She was a refugee, a piece of floating debris that had washed up on his clean, marble shore. The silence was deafening. He was standing by the window, his back to her, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was waiting for her to break, or to run, or to speak. She did none of those things. She was just empty. "He won't stop," she said, her voice dead. "You've claimed me. Now," in his head, "this is a game to you, maybe. But to him, it's war. He will burn me to the ground to make sure you can't have me." Dante turned slowly. His face was a mask of shadows and cold, controlled anger. "He has already," he said, "burned you to the ground." He crossed the room, his steps silent. He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled of whiskey and something clean, like soap and cold air. "This man," he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "He thinks he has power. He thinks his badge and his fists make him a king. But he is an insect. Lena." He reached out, his hand moving slowly, as if not to spook her. He didn't touch her face. He didn't touch her hair. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed the side of her body, just above her hip, over the thin cotton of her shirt. It was an absent, almost territorial gesture, a grazing touch as he leaned in. Lena's body reacted before her mind. She flinched, a violent, full-body recoil, a gasp of pure, animal pain sucking the air from her lungs. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her side, her eyes wide with terror and agony. Dante froze. His hand, which had been so gentle, was now suspended in the air between them. His face, which had been cold anger, was now completely, utterly still. "You're still hurt," he stated. It was not a question. "No," Lena panted, the lie automatic, desperate. "No, I stumbled. I fell in the apartment, on the glass. I'm fine." He watched her, his eyes narrowed, dissecting her, seeing every seam of her lie. He saw her ragged breathing, the way her arm was pressed protectively to her ribs. He took a step. She took one back, her back hitting a cold, marble pillar. She was trapped. "You fell," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Yes," she whispered, tears of pain and fear welling. "Please, Dante, I'm just tired. I need to—" "You're a bad liar, Lena." He was in front of her now, his body blocking the light, his presence all-encompassing. He lifted his hand, and she squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for a blow. His touch was so gentle it was almost an absence of touch. His warm, calloused fingers cupped her jaw, tilting her face up to his. Her skin screamed at the contact, so unused to a touch that wasn't violence. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice a rough whisper. She opened her eyes. His were inches from hers, gray and stormy, filled with a terrible, consuming fire she could not name. "Undress," he said, the words cutting through the silence. "What?" she choked. "Your shirt," he clarified, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, his voice raw. "I want to see the truth." "No, please, Dante, no. Don't ask me to do that." The humiliation, the shame. It was too much. "I am not him," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "I am not asking to own you. I'm asking to see what he did." His eyes held hers. "I need to see the truth, Lena. I need to know." Shaking, her whole body was a single, violent tremor. He was not him. He was not Travis. But this request, it was the ultimate surrender. It was letting him see the ugly, broken, secret parts she had kept hidden under layers of turtlenecks and bandages. He did not rush her. He just waited, his hands still cupping her jaw, his gaze unwavering. Slowly, her hands, which felt like they belonged to someone else, moved to the hem of her t-shirt. They fumbled, the fabric twisting. He let her go, his hands falling to his sides, giving her the space. With a ragged, broken sob, she grabbed the hem of the shirt and pulled it up, over her head, and threw it to the floor. She stood before him, bare from the waist up, save for her cheap, worn bra and the crude, white ace bandage she had wrapped, tighter and tighter every day, around her torso. Dante's reaction was silent, but it was more violent than any scream. He made a sound, a choked, strangled noise in the back of his throat, his entire body tensed, as if taking a physical blow. His hands, which had been so steady, clenched into fists at his sides, and she could see them trembling. His face went pale, a stark, gray-white, and his eyes were stricken. He stared at the bandage, at the angry, purple, black, and yellow bruises that peeked out from above and below it, at the map of her suffering, written on her skin. "Who did this?" he whispered, his voice unrecognizable, a hollow, shattered thing. And when? That was it. The question, the simple, awful question. The dam broke. The walls she had lived behind, the ones she had built of lies and bandages and silence, they didn't just crack, they evaporated. She broke. A wail, a sound she didn't know she was capable of making, tore from her throat, and she fell. He caught her. He lunged forward, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his hard, warm chest. He crushed her to him, his hand tangling in her hair, holding her head to his shoulder as if he could physically hold the broken pieces of her together. She cried, she wept, she sobbed. She ugly cried into the fine wool of his suit jacket. All the years of terror, all the pain, all the humiliation, all the silent screams pouring out of her. She clung to him, her fists grabbing his suit, her body shaking so violently she thought she might come apart, and he just held her. He didn't shush her. He didn't pat her back. He held her. He held her as if she were the most precious, breakable thing in the world, and he was the only thing keeping her from shattering. He murmured into her hair, his voice thick, his words a low, rhythmic balm. "It's okay. You're safe. I have you. You're safe now. No more lies. No more hiding. I have you." He held her for a long time, until the storm of her sobs subsided into ragged, gasping breaths. He did not let her go. He eased his grip, one hand still tangled in her hair, the other sliding to her back, his palm a warm, steady pressure. "Let's get this off," he said softly, his fingers finding the metal clip of the bandage. She nodded, her face still buried in his chest. He unwrapped her, his movements gentle, clinical, but his hands were still shaking. The bandage fell to the floor. Joining her shirt, he held her at arm's length, just enough to look. He didn't flinch this time. He just looked. He traced the outline of the worst bruise, the one on her ribs, his finger hovering an inch above her skin, not daring to touch, as if he could feel the heat of the injury. "He kicked you," he stated, his voice dead. She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. "3 weeks ago, and again, I think one is broken." Dante closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them, they were full of a cold, clear, lethal fire. He lifted his gaze from her wounds to her eyes. "He will never," he said, his voice a vow, "put his hands on you again." He bent his head, and his mouth covered hers. It was not a kiss of pity. It was not a kiss of lust. It was a claiming. It was a promise. It was gentle, so achingly gentle, his lips soft, hesitant, as if he were afraid he might break her. But underneath, she could feel a restrained hunger, a deep, coiled intensity that matched the fire in his eyes. It was a kiss that said, "You are mine to protect." She gasped into his mouth, her hands, which had been clinging to his suit, sliding up, her fingers tangling in his short, dark hair. She kissed him back. She kissed him with all the desperation, all the fear, all the tiny, starved hope that she had. She kissed him with the truth. He deepened the kiss, his mouth slanting over hers, his arm a steel band around her waist, pulling her flush against him, her bare skin against his suit. It was a kiss that sealed a pact. He broke away, just barely, his forehead resting against hers, his breath a warm puff against her lips. They were both breathing hard. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice a gravelly, broken thing. Lena looked into his gray, stormy eyes, the eyes of the man who had pulled her from the water, the man who had seen her truth and not looked away. "Don't you dare," she whispered back. He did not kiss her again. Not that night. After her confession. After he had held her while she fell apart. He had lifted her. He had carried her, not to the guest room, but to his own. His room was as stark as the rest of the penthouse, dominated by a massive bed and a wall of glass that looked out over the sleeping city. He laid her on the sheets, which were cool and smelled like him. He had gone to his own bathroom and returned with a first aid kit, a basin of warm water, and a soft cloth. He had not spoken. He had sat on the edge of the bed and, with a surgeon's gentle precision, he had cleaned the small cuts on her back from the glass in her apartment. He had examined her ribs, his touch light, his brow furrowed in a concentration so intense it was frightening. "This one is cracked," he'd stated, his voice flat. "Maybe two. We'll need a doctor, someone I trust." He had applied a salve to the bruises, his hands impossibly gentle, his gaze fixed on his task. He worked with a reverence, as if tending to a priceless, damaged artifact. Lena had simply watched him, her tears dry, her body a map of pain he was now reading with his fingertips. She was too empty to be ashamed, too tired to be afraid. When he was finished, he had pulled the sheet up to her chin. He had disappeared for a moment and returned wearing a pair of dark sweatpants. He got into the bed beside her, on top of the covers. "Sleep," he'd commanded, and turned his back to her, a solid, warm wall of muscle. Now, this was their routine. Lena slept in Dante's bed. She would wake in the middle of the night, a silent scream in her throat from a dream of Travis, and the first thing she would feel was the solid, steady heat of Dante's body next to hers. He was always there. He slept on his back, a gun on the nightstand beside him, and he did not seem to move at all. He was a creature of profound, dangerous stillness, but he never touched her. He had given her his bed, his room, his protection, but he demanded nothing. He waited. He watched. He was letting her heal, not just physically, but emotionally. He was giving her space, something she had never had, even while sharing the most intimate place in his home. One night, she woke from a nightmare, trembling, a sheen of cold sweat on her skin. She sat up, her heart hammering against her cracked ribs. His voice came from the darkness, low and calm. "You're here. You're safe. He's not here." She laid back down, her breathing ragged. She was so cold. She felt him shift. He turned on his side, his body a furnace, and draped his arm over her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was careful of her ribs. He did not pull her close for intimacy, but for warmth, for ballast. "Go to sleep, Lena," he murmured into her hair. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against her back. "You don't," she whispered, her voice thick. "You don't have to want anything." His arm tightened, just slightly. His voice was a low rumble in her ear, and it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "When it happens, you'll beg for it. Until then," he whispered, his breath warming her neck, "I'll just keep you warm." And she slept. She slept without dreaming, anchored by his weight, his scent, and his impossible, terrifying patience. The days in the penthouse were quiet. Dante had a doctor, an older, grim-faced man who looked like he had seen too much. Come to the apartment, he had confirmed it. 2 cracked ribs, 1 fractured. He taped her side, gave her pain medication that made her head fuzzy, and told her not to move. So she existed in Dante's world. She wore his clothes. She ate the food his housekeeper, a silent woman who looked terrified of Dante and intrigued by Lena, prepared. She read his books, which were surprisingly old and well-worn volumes of history and philosophy. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, but for the first time in her life, she was safe from the wolf at the door. The wolf, however, had not forgotten her. The call came on a Tuesday, from a number she didn't recognize. She had been cleared to walk and was standing on the balcony, feeling the weak autumn sun on her face. "Lena? Is that you? Sweetheart." Her blood ran cold. "Sal? How did you get this number?" "The man who hired you." Sal, her old boss from the Rusty Nail, said. He sounded tired. "He left it. Said if I ever needed to reach you for an emergency." "Lena, what's going on?" Sal, I gotta let you go, kid. I'm sorry, I really am. You're a hard worker, but I can't have this filth in my establishment. Filth? Sal, what are you talking about? He sighed, a heavy, static-filled sound. He came by. The cop, Travis, he showed me things. Lena, pictures. Lena's stomach dropped into her shoes. The penthouse, the city, the sky, it all tilted, the photos. The ones he'd taken when they first got together, back when she trusted him, back when she'd been stupid and in what she thought was love, private photos. Photos she had begged him to delete, and he had sworn he had. "He showed them to you?" she whispered, her voice hollow. "And he put one up," Sal said, his voice thick with disgust. "On the bulletin board in the back, the staff board. I tore it down, of course. But Chloe saw it, and Lena, I'm running a family place. I can't have cops coming in, flashing dirty pictures, making trouble." "I understand," she said. The words tasted like ash. "I'm sorry, kid, I really am. Don't come back here. He's watching the place. He's unhinged." The line clicked. Lena stood there, the phone in her hand, until it slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the stone. He had done it. He had finally done it. He had taken her last shred of dignity, her job, her small, pathetic place in the world, and he had soiled it. He had made her into what he always said she was. When Dante came home that night, he found her in the living room, in the dark, staring at the city lights. "You're not in bed," he said. He sounded pleased. The doctor said walking is good. He flicked on a low lamp, and his face changed. He saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "I quit my job," she said, her voice flat. He frowned, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "Good. You weren't going back there anyway." He walked to the bar, pouring himself his usual whiskey. "I'll take care of Sal. He was a good man. He deserves a severance for his trouble." "You don't understand," she said, the words high and tight. "I didn't quit. I was fired." He stopped, the glass halfway to his mouth. "Fired? For what? For not showing up?" "For being," she said, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat, "a whore." The glass in his hand made a sharp crack as he set it down on the granite. "What did you say?" She stood up, trembling, the rage and shame a toxic cocktail in her blood. "He won. Travis, he won. He knows I'm here. He knows he can't get to me. So he's destroying my life from the outside. He's destroying me piece by piece." And she told him. She told him about Sal, about the pictures, about the bulletin board. Dante's stillness was the most terrifying thing she'd ever witnessed. He did not rage, he did not yell, he did not move, he simply absorbed it, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. His face was a mask of chiseled, pale marble. His gray eyes were not gray anymore. They were black, too dark, empty holes of pure, condensed, silent fury. He showed them. Each word was a chip of ice. "Yes," she whispered, her anger gone, replaced by a sudden, cold fear of the man in front of her. "Where is he?" "Dante." "No. Where?" he repeated, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "Does he drink?" she told him. She told him the name of the cop bar Travis practically lived at. "Stay here," he said. He grabbed his keys. "Dante, please," she cried, running after him. "Don't. This is what he wants. He wants you to react. He wants to arrest you, to get you on his territory. He's the law." Dante paused at the elevator. His hand on the button, he turned, and the look on his face stopped her heart. It was a look of cold, profound certainty. "He's not the law," he said. "He's a stain, and I am the one who cleans." The elevator doors opened, and he was gone. The parking lot of the Crying Shame was slick with a recent rain, the puddles reflecting the flickering neon sign. Travis Miller stumbled out, laughing at a joke his partner had told. He fumbled for his keys, his blood warm with whiskey and satisfaction. A black Bentley rolled to a stop, its headlights pinning him against his own patrol car. Travis shielded his eyes, annoyed. "Hey, dim your lights, asshole!" Two men got out. Nico, who stayed by the car, and Dante Morelli, who walked into the beams of light, his expensive suit and calm demeanor a complete, bizarre contrast to the setting. Travis's heart gave a jolt. He recognized him from the bar, the Italian. He sobered up, fast, his hand moving reflexively to the gun on his hip. Well, well, Travis sneered, his fear manifesting as bravado. The Wop King himself. Come down to the gutter? What's the matter? Your little whore run dry? Dante stopped 10 feet away. He did not react. He just looked at Travis, his gray eyes flat and dead. I know what you did, Dante said. His voice was quiet, conversational, but it carried in the damp night air. Travis's smile faltered. I do a lot of things. I'm a busy man. You showed a man named Sal photos, Dante continued, his voice as calm as a priest's. Private photos of a woman you have been terrorizing, a woman who is now under my protection. The words hung in the air. Under my protection. It was a declaration. Travis laughed, a high-pitched, ugly sound. Protection? Is that what you call it? I call it pimping. Look, you little guinea thug, he said, stepping forward, his chest puffed out. You're just a criminal. You're a joke. I am the law. He jabbed a finger at his own chest, at the badge hidden under his jacket. You see this? This means I can do whatever I want. And you can't touch me. You're a thug, and I'm the law. Dante smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Travis had ever seen. It was not a smile of humor. It was the smile of a wolf, baring its teeth. You're right, Dante said, his voice still soft. You are the law, and I am just a thug. He turned, as if to leave. But the law, he said, looking over his shoulder, is so easily broken. He got back in the car. The Bentley's engine purred, and it glided away, leaving Travis alone in the sudden darkness, his heart hammering with an unfamiliar, cold emotion, fear. Back at the penthouse, Lena was packing. She had made a decision. Dante's words echoed in her head. I am the one who cleans. He was going to kill Travis, or be killed, or be arrested. He was going to war for her. And she had spent her entire life watching a man use his badge as a weapon. Travis would win. He would claim self-defense. He would call Dante a mob boss, a stalker, and he would use Lena's reputation to bury him. She would not be the reason Dante Morelli, the only man who had ever shown her a shred of kindness without a price tag, was destroyed. She found a pen and a piece of his heavy, cream-colored stationery. Dante, she wrote, her hands shaking, you can't win this. He's the law, and I'm the trash he uses to bait the trap. I won't let you be caught. I won't let him destroy you, too. Please, forget me. I am not worth this. I am not worth anything. She left the note on the marble kitchen island. She put on her old jeans and sneakers, which his housekeeper had inexplicably washed and saved. She grabbed the $100 she had in her wallet from her old job. She took the service elevator, her heart a leaden weight, and she ran. She didn't know where she was going, she just ran. Dante returned to an empty penthouse. The silence that greeted him was not the comfortable quiet he was used to. It was a dead, hollow silence. Lena? He called. He saw the note. He read it. Once, twice. I'm not worth anything. A sound, a low, animalistic growl ripped from his chest. His control, the ironclad, legendary control of Dante Morelli, shattered. He backhanded the whiskey glass on the counter. It exploded against the far wall. He seized the heavy granite-topped island stool and threw it. It cartwheeled across the marble floor, taking out a priceless sculpture. He swept the bar clean. Bottles of whiskey, gin, and 100-year-old brandy smashed against the floor, a symphony of destruction. Dante! Nico burst in, his gun drawn. Boss, what? He stopped, his eyes wide, taking in the wreckage. His boss was standing in a sea of broken glass and expensive liquor, his chest heaving, his hands bleeding, his face a mask of such terrifying, cold rage that Nico took a step back. Dante looked up, his eyes black. She's gone, he said, his voice a rasp. Boss, Find her. The command was absolute. Turn this city upside down. Use every man we have. Check every bus station, every shelter, every hospital. I want her found now. Nico found her 22 hours later. Lena was at the St. Jude's Women's Shelter, on the other side of the river. She was huddled in a cot in a dormitory with 30 other women, her name on a list, her identity just another story of a man with hard fists. She was cold, she was hungry, and she was, for the first time, truly, utterly alone. She was in the cafeteria, staring at a cup of gray, lukewarm oatmeal, when the front desk attendant, a harried-looking woman, called her name. "Lena Marlowe? Someone's here for you." Lena frowned. "No, that's impossible. Nobody—" And then she saw him. He strode into the shelter's worn, linoleum-floored lobby like a king entering a conquered territory. He was in a fresh suit, his hair perfect, but his eyes were wild. They were the eyes of a hawk that had finally spotted its prey. He was flanked by Nico and 2 other men who looked like they ate boulders for breakfast. The women in the lobby scattered, melting into the walls. Lena's spoon clattered onto her tray. She stood, her body frozen in shock. He saw her. He crossed the room in 3 long, predatory strides. He didn't speak. He didn't yell. He grabbed her hand, his grip a steel manacle, warm and strong, and he yanked her forward, pulling her hard against his chest, his other arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her to him, and his face buried in her hair, his breath a hot, ragged gasp. "I told you," he hissed, his voice a low, furious, desperate sound, "not to run from me." He pulled her out of the shelter, past the wide-eyed attendant, and into the waiting Bentley. The ride back was silent, but the air was thick, charged with his fury, his relief, and her terror. He didn't speak until they were back in the penthouse, the elevator doors sliding shut, sealing them in. "Why?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "To protect you," she cried, her fear finally giving way to her own desperate frustration. "To save you. He's a cop. Dante. He will use me to destroy you. And you think leaving," he roared, "you think going back to—" "That," he gestured, as if he could still smell the shelter's despair, "is protecting me? You think my life is worth more than yours?" "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, it is. I'm nothing. I'm what he made me. I'm just—" "Bruises and bad memories. Do not," he said, seizing her by the shoulders, his grip bruising, "ever say that again." He stared at her, his chest heaving, his gray eyes blazing with a fire that was not just anger, but a deep, aching. "Something. You," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, "are the first thing I have ever wanted that my money could not buy." He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not patient. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry and full of a raw, starving hunger. His mouth was hard on hers, demanding, taking, and she gave him everything. She kissed him back with all her fear, all her despair, all her broken, jagged pieces. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back, his mouth plundering hers. She clawed at his suit jacket, pulling him closer, needing to feel him, all of him. He lifted her, his arms like steel bands, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her body flush against his. He carried her, never breaking the kiss, his mouth a hot, possessive brand on hers. He kicked open his bedroom door and laid her on the bed. He did not throw her. He placed her, a deliberate, conscious act, before tearing off his own jacket and tie. He loomed over her, his eyes a tempest. "You are not leaving me," he stated. "I'm not." She panted, her hands already on the buttons of his shirt, her fingers fumbling. "I'm not." This time, there was no hesitation. This time, there was no fear. There was only this, a desperate, burning need to erase the world, to erase Travis, to erase the shelter. He was not rough. He was intense. He was urgent. His hands were everywhere, but they were not like Travis's. They did not take, they worshipped, they memorized. His mouth left her lips, trailing a line of fire down her jaw, to her throat, to the hollow of her collarbone. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his eyes on hers. He unbuttoned her worn shirt, his fingers brushing the skin. He kissed the tops of her shoulders. He slid her jeans down her legs, his hands warm on her skin. and he kissed her bruises. He kissed the yellowing, fading marks on her stomach. He pressed his lips, gently, so gently, to the taped, cracked rib. "No more," he whispered against her skin. "Never again." She, in turn, pulled his ruined shirt open, needing to see him. His chest was hard, muscled, but it was not perfect. It was a road map of his own life. A long, thin scar ran diagonally across his pectoral. A small, puckered mark, a bullet hole, was just above his hip. She kissed the long scar. "What?" "A disagreement," he murmured. She kissed the bullet hole. "And this?" "A mistake." She kissed his mouth, hard. "You're real," she whispered. He was on top of her, his weight a comfort, not a threat. He was braced on his arms, his eyes locked with hers. "You are the only thing I want," he whispered, his voice raw. "That money can't buy." And when he finally made them one. It was not a taking, it was a fusion. It was a desperate, emotional, claiming. It was her, surrendering to trust. It was him, surrendering to tenderness. It was intense, and it was emotional, and it was the first true, healing breath she had taken in a decade. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights their only witness. Her head was on his chest, her hand flat over his heart, feeling its steady, strong beat. The silence was no longer empty, it was full. She felt his lips press into her hair. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice small. She felt his chest expand as he took a deep breath. His arm, a heavy, protective weight, tightened around her. "Now," he said, his voice a low, dark promise against her skin. "I burn your past." Dante Morelli's penthouse, once a bastion of sterile silence, transformed into a quiet, humming nerve center. The war he launched was not one of street corners and gunfire. It was a campaign of whispers, of paper cuts, of debts called in and favors cashed. It was the kind of war Dante excelled at, fought not with muscle, but with the insidious, crushing weight of influence. Lena watched him. He slept even less. Existing in a state of coiled, lethal focus, he would stand at the window for hours, his phone to his ear, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "I need the file from the precinct evidence locker, the one that went missing in 2020. The hospital on the west side. Find the admissions report for Lena Marlowe for the last 4 years. I don't care if it was logged as a fall. Get me Senator Thompson now." Nico was a constant, solid shadow, appearing with thick manila envelopes and leaving with new, impossible-sounding orders. He found 2 officers in Travis's own precinct who were drowning in gambling debts, a quiet delivery of cash, and suddenly they were Dante's eyes and ears. They owed him their silence, and now they owed him their voices. "He's dirty, boss," Nico reported one night, setting a small audio recorder on the Marble Island. "But he's not just a bully. He's on the take. Small-time extortion. Got a local business owner, a guy named Pat, under his thumb." "Get me the business owner," Dante said. "That's the problem. He's terrified. Travis has him on an old evidence tampering charge he's sitting on." "Then we don't just lean on him," Dante said, his voice flat. "We offer him a better deal. Protection. Get our lawyers to him. We'll get the charge buried. For good. In exchange for his testimony." Lena, who was getting stronger, her ribs now a dull, purple ache instead of a searing fire, watched this machine at work. She was living inside the engine of a silent, powerful predator. The sheer, meticulous, and cold-blooded efficiency of it all was terrifying. One night, she found him on the balcony, the city lights a galaxy at his feet. He was in a suit, as always, but his tie was loosened, his jacket off. He was staring at the distant, flashing blue and red lights of the Eastbrook precinct. "Dante," she said, her voice soft. He didn't turn, but she knew he was listening. "This is—" She searched for the word. "This is a lot. This is an army." "It's what I do," he said, his voice rough. She stepped up beside him, wrapping one of his cashmere robes tighter around herself. "He's just one man. He's one man who put his hands on you," Dante replied, as if that explained the entire universe. "He showed the world your pain. He tried to make you ashamed of what he did. For that, I will dismantle him, piece by piece, until he is nothing but a forgotten, bad memory. The cold and final-sounding truth of his words made her shiver. She saw a future where Dante, for her, crossed a line from which he could not return. She saw the stain on him. "I don't want him dead," she whispered, the confession shocking her with its sudden clarity. He turned then, his gray eyes searching hers in the dark. "What?" "I don't," she said, her voice stronger. "I've lived with violence, with the fear of it, my whole life. I want it to be over. I want him gone. I want him to have no power, but I don't want him dead. I don't want that for him, and I don't want that for you." Dante looked at her for a long, profound moment. He had built his world on a foundation of clean, simple solutions. Death was the cleanest. What she was asking for was harder. It was complicated. He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. His death would be simple, a quick end. "I don't want simple," when she said, "I want justice. I want him to know what it's like to have his whole life taken from him, legally, where he can't fight back." A slow, cold smile touched Dante's lips. He had not considered this. He had been planning an execution. She was offering him the blueprints for a vivisection. "You're right," he said, his voice a low, admiring rumble. "That's better." He looked back at the city. "Then I'll bury him legally. It will be slower, and it will hurt him a great deal more." The climax of his plan came 2 weeks later. The pieces were in place. The internal affairs complaint had been filed anonymously, backed by a mountain of evidence from Dante's lawyers. The business owner was ready to testify. The 2 bribed cops had given their statements. All Dante needed was a stage. "We're going out," he announced on a Friday afternoon. Lena, who was now dressed in clothes he had bought her, simple, soft sweaters and jeans, looked up from her book. "Out? The annual Police Benevolent Association charity gala," he said, a ghost of a smirk on his face. Lena's blood turned to ice. "No, Dante, absolutely not. I can't. That's his home ground. It's a building full of him." "It's a building full of men who are about to find out what he is," Dante corrected, walking over to her. He crouched in front of her, taking her hands. "I'm not asking you to go into the lion's den. I'm asking you to walk beside me while I set it on fire. But you will be safe, and you will not be alone. Not for 1 second." His bedroom was awash in light. A dress was laid out on the bed. It was not a dress for hiding. It was a long, elegant column of deep, emerald green silk, and it was entirely backless. "Dante," she breathed, her hand going to the fabric. "I can't. The bruises, they're gone, but I know," he said, his voice low, from behind her. "That is why you will wear it. You have nothing to hide. You never did." When she was ready, she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Her hair, which had been lank and lifeless, was now shiny, falling in soft waves. Her skin was clear, her eyes bright. The dress clung to her, a suit of liquid armor. She looked strong. She realized, like she belonged with him. Dante was waiting by the elevator, dressed in a black tuxedo that seemed to be crafted from shadows. He looked devastating. He was a king in his war paint. When his eyes landed on her, he stopped breathing for a second. He did not compliment her. He did not have to. His gaze was a physical touch, a mixture of raw hunger, profound pride, and a dark, possessive fire. He held out his arm. "It is time," he said. The ballroom at the Eastbrook Plaza was a sea of dress blues, political suits, and glittering gowns. The air hummed with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. The moment Dante Morelli and Lena Marlowe walked in, a ripple of silence followed them. Heads turned, conversations stopped, the city's primary shadow, the man whose name was whispered but never spoken, had just walked into the light, with a goddess on his arm. Lena's hand tightened on his bicep. "Dante? Breathe. Mia cara," he whispered, his hand covering hers, his thumb rubbing small circles. "You are with me." They made their way to a table in the back, a table he had, of course, reserved, which overlooked the entire room, and then she saw him. Travis was at the bar, his face red, his uniform tight, his laughter too loud. He was drunk, arrogant, and holding court. He had not seen them. Not yet. "He looks," Lena whispered, "like he doesn't have a care in the world." "The ignorant always do," Dante said, pulling out her chair. "Right before the fall." It took 20 minutes. Travis turned from the bar, a fresh drink in his hand, and his eyes scanned the room. They passed over Lena, then snapped back. His face. It was a kaleidoscope of shock, rage, and a sudden acidic jealousy so potent Lena could feel it from across the room. He saw her. He saw the dress. He saw the hand Dante had placed on the back of her neck. He saw his property, polished and claimed by another. He started toward them, a bulldog marching to a fight. The men he was with tried to stop him, but he shook them off. He slammed his drink down on their table, splashing champagne onto the white linen. "Well, well," he sneered, his voice thick with whiskey. "Look what the sewer spat out." Lena's body went rigid. The old, familiar ice of fear shot through her veins. "And you," Travis spat, gesturing to Dante. "You clean her up, but she's still trash. How much an hour are you paying her? Morelli? Or—" He leaned in, his voice a grotesque, conspiratorial whisper. "Is she paying you? With all the new tricks I'm sure you taught her." Lena flinched, as if he had struck her. This was her nightmare. This was the public humiliation he had always promised. Dante did not look at Travis. He did not stand. He did not react at all. He simply turned his full, undivided attention to Lena. He placed his hand on the small of her bare back, his fingers warm, a stark contrast to the cold silk. "Lena," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble that only she could hear. She tore her eyes from the monster in front of her and looked at her savior. His gray eyes were not angry. They were warm. They were full of her. He leaned in, and in front of the entire police force, in front of the man who had tried to destroy her, he kissed her. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss from his bedroom. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a kiss of such profound, unequivocal, public ownership that it was a declaration of war and a treaty of peace all at once. His lips were soft, moving over hers with a tenderness that made her heart ache. He was telling the entire world, and her, that she was not trash. She was his. He pulled back, his eyes still locked on hers, and her face was flushed, her lips swollen. Then, and only then, did he turn his head, his gaze an Arctic blast, and look at the stunned, trembling, furious man beside their table. "Excuse us," Dante said, his voice bored. He stood, pulling Lena's chair out for her, and, with his hand resting possessively on the curve of her waist, he guided her to the dance floor, leaving Travis Miller alone, shaking and, for the first time in his life, utterly powerless. The arrest happened 2 days later. It was not cinematic. It was, as Dante had promised, legal. Travis was at his desk, hungover and furious, his partner tossing paper clips at the ceiling. 2 men in gray, unremarkable suits walked in, their faces devoid of expression. They were from Internal Affairs. "Officer Miller?" the taller one asked. "Yeah." "What do you want? Suits?" Travis growled, leaning back in his chair, his boots on the desk. The man held up a sheaf of papers. "Travis Miller, you are under arrest." Travis's boots slammed to the floor. "Arrest? For what? This is a joke." "For 2 counts of domestic abuse." The man read, his voice a monotone. "1 count of evidence tampering and 1 count of felony blackmail, based on the testimony of Mr. Patrick O'Malley." Travis's face went from red to a pasty, terrified white. He looked around for his partner, for his friends, but the entire bullpen was suddenly, intensely, fascinated by their computer screens. "This is," he stammered, "this is crap. You can't. That thug Morelli. He set me up." "Mr. Morelli's legal team provided the corroborating evidence. Yes," the suit said. "But the hospital reports, the old files you buried, and the sworn testimony of 2 fellow officers, those are all yours." He produced a pair of handcuffs. "Please stand, Officer Miller. Put your hands behind your back." The click of the cuffs was the loudest sound in the entire precinct. It was the sound of a cage door closing. the sound of a badge turning to tin, the sound of a life ending. Lena did not see it. She was, at that moment, standing in her old apartment. She had asked Dante to take her. She needed to see it. The boarded-up door had been removed. The landlord, paid off by Dante, letting her in. The smell hit her first. Stale fear, old food, and the mildew of despair. The wreckage was still there. The slashed couch, the broken television, the floor still stained. And there, on the floor, was the broken, empty frame of the picture of her mother. The glass long since swept away, but the word he had written still visible. She looked at the woman who had lived here, the ghost in the turtleneck, the girl who flinched at loud noises, who ate old bread, who bandaged her own broken ribs. She had been so afraid. She had been so alone. Lena felt a deep, profound wave of pity for that girl, but she did not recognize her. She was a photograph, a memory from a different life. She walked into the bedroom, to the spot where she had hidden Dante's money, the money that had been stolen. She reached under the loose floorboard, a place even Travis had not known, and pulled out a small, velvet pouch, her mother's ring. She slipped it on her finger, turned and walked out. She did not look back. She left the apartment, the building, the entire neighborhood, and got into the waiting Bentley. Dante was in the back, reading a paper. He folded it when she got in, his eyes watching her. She was silent for the entire ride. When they were in the penthouse elevator, the silence was no longer empty, but comfortable, expectant. She walked into the living room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, and she turned to him. "It's not just about safety," she said, her voice clear, strong. "It's not about being rescued anymore. I'm not that girl. Dante, I'm not the ghost from the apartment." He watched her, his hands in his pockets, waiting. "I want a life," and she said, walking toward him, her steps sure, a real one, with coffee on the balcony, and books and arguments. She stopped, inches from him, and put her hand on his chest, over his heart. "I want a life, with you." Dante's expression, so often guarded, softened. He covered her hand with his, pressing it to his heart. "It was always yours, Lena." That night, the rain returned, tapping gently on the glass walls of the bedroom. It was not a storm, but a soft, cleansing sound. They were in bed, under the covers. Lena was propped against the pillows, reading, wearing one of his T-shirts. Dante was lying on his side, watching her, his head propped on his hand. The room was quiet, peaceful. The war was over. He reached out, his hand sliding under the hem of her shirt, his palm warm against her skin. He didn't move it. He just held her, his hand resting over her side, over the ribs that were now healed, over the skin that was no longer bruised. She closed her book, setting it aside, and covered his hand with her own. She leaned into his touch. He moved closer, his lips brushing her temple. "No more hiding," he whispered, his voice a low, warm rumble against her skin. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his. "From now on," he continued, his gray eyes soft in the lamplight, "you only undress in front of someone who loves you." The news was a cold, sharp stone dropped into a calm pond. Dante was on the phone, his back to her, standing before the wall of glass. Lena, curled on the sofa, reading, watched his shoulders tense. "When?" he said. It was not a question, a pause. "Where is he?" Another pause. Dante's hand, the one holding the phone, clenched so tightly the device creaked. "Find him." He hung up. He did not turn. "Dante?" Lena asked, setting her book aside. "He made bail," Dante said, his voice a flat, dead thing. The quiet in the room was suddenly heavy, suffocating. An old partner, some union lawyer. They pulled a string. Lena's blood, which had been so warm and slow, turned to slush. "He's out. And he's gone," Dante said, finally turning. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He didn't check in with his bail officer. He disappeared. Lena's old, familiar tremor started in her hands. He was out. He was free. And he was invisible. Dante crossed the room in 2 strides, crouching in front of her, his hands taking hers, stilling the tremor. "Lena, look at me." She met his His gray eyes were not panicked. They were resolved. "He's desperate," Dante said, his voice low. "He's lost his job, his reputation, and his power. He's a wounded animal, and he has nothing left to lose. He's not done." "What do we do?" she whispered. "I've doubled security," he said. "Nico will be outside this door. Always. The elevators are locked to my biometrics. No one gets in or out, but you are not a prisoner here. You are protected." He was wrong. She had been a prisoner in her old apartment. This was a fortress, and for the first time, she was on the inside of the walls, not on the outside, trying to get in. The shadow of Travis's freedom spurred Lena's recovery. The dull ache in her ribs was a reminder. But the doctor, the grim-faced man who was on Dante's payroll, had cleared her for light activity. Dante hired a physical therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Maria, who came to the penthouse 3 times a week. Maria pushed her, stretching the tight, scarred muscles, rebuilding the strength Travis had systematically beaten out of her. "Breathe through it," Maria would command, her hands pressing on Lena's back. "This is good pain. This is the pain of building, not breaking. There is a difference." And Lena breathed. She pushed. She sweat. The bruises, the map of her old life, faded from purple and yellow to a faint, greenish memory, and then disappeared entirely. Her skin was her own again. One afternoon, Dante took her down to the subterranean garage. It was a cavern of gleaming, dark metal, Bentleys, a Ferrari, several black sedans. He led her to a sleek, dark gray Mercedes, a car that looked like a safe, beautiful tank. "Do you know how to drive?" I had a license," she said. "A long time ago. He didn't like me going places. He said I was a bad driver. He sold my car." "He lied," Dante said, opening the passenger door. "Get in." He drove her to a private gated road on one of his properties upstate, and then he made her switch seats. "You're going to drive," he said. "Dante, I haven't in 4 years. I'm shaking." "Good," he said, his hand covering hers on the steering wheel. "Your body remembers the fear. Now, make it remember the freedom. The car will do what you tell it. You are in control. Drive." Her first few attempts were jerky, her shoulders high with tension, but he sat beside her, his presence a calm, solid weight. He didn't criticize. He didn't yell. He just said, "Good. Now a little faster. You've got this." She drove for an hour. By the end, her knuckles were no longer white. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. She had forgotten this feeling, the power of movement, of choice, confidence. She learned, was not a gift. It was a muscle. It was rebuilt. One painful, repetitive motion at a time. She started dressing differently. The turtlenecks, which she had kept as a morbid reminder, were thrown away. She was no longer a woman defined by what she had to hide. Dante's black t-shirts were still a comfort at night, but during the day, she wore the new clothes he had bought her. Soft sweaters in ivory and blue, jeans that fit, boots with solid heels. One day, shopping with Nico as a silent, looming shadow. She saw it. It was in a small boutique window, a shop Dante owned. Of course, it was a dress, a simple silk sheath, and it was red, the color of blood, of wine, of stop signs, the color of look at me. She bought it. She wore it that night, to dinner, not out, just in the penthouse. Dante had a table set on the balcony. When she walked out, he was pouring wine. He stopped, the bottle hovering in his hand. He looked at her. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. He saw the woman she had become, the woman he had patiently, silently, helped to forge. "Red," he finally said, his voice thick. "It's a good color on you." The last piece of her old life fell away when he took her to meet his mother. "My mother's house," he'd said, "is neutral ground, no business, no violence, only family, and she wants to meet you." His mother, Isabella Morelli, was nothing like Lena had imagined. She was not a grand operatic matriarch. She was a small, quiet woman in a simple black dress, her gray hair pulled back in an elegant knot. She lived in a sprawling, old-world estate on the coast, a house of stone and ivy that smelled of old money and sea salt. And she had Dante's eyes, sharp, assessing and missing nothing. She was polite, serving them espresso in tiny porcelain cups. She spoke to Dante in rapid, low Italian, and he would respond, his voice softer, more human than Lena had ever heard it. Finally, Dante was called away by his uncle to look at a prized boat. He left Lena alone with his mother on the stone terrace, overlooking a stormy, gray sea. Isabella C_popped her espresso, her gaze fixed on Lena. "So," Isabella said, her English perfect, accented, "you are the one, the ghost." I don't know what you mean." Lena stammered. "My son," Isabella said, "has been a shadow for 20 years, ever since his father left. He became a man of stone. He built a fortress around himself. He was quiet, cold, effective. He was alone." She turned her sharp gaze back to Lena. "And now, he's different." "Different how?" "He's quieter still," his mother said, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "But it is not the quiet of the ice. It is the quiet of the deep water. He's stronger. He has something to protect. Not a business, not a name, a life." She held Lena's gaze. "You have changed him." "He changed me," Lena whispered. He saved me." "He did not save you, child," Isabella said, setting her cup down. "He gave you the air. You saved yourself. He simply stopped the man who was trying to drown you. There is a difference." The attack came on a Saturday. A brutal, late autumn storm was raging, the wind and rain lashing against the stone of Isabella's estate. Dante had wanted them to stay, the roads being too dangerous. Lena was in the library, a vast 2-story room filled with the scent of old paper and wood smoke from the fireplace. Dante was in the adjoining study, on a call with Nico, who was monitoring the city. The power flickered, the lights went out, then came back on, running on the house's massive generator. "It's a real storm," Lena murmured, looking out the rain-lashed window. "You're safe here," a voice said. Lena smiled. "I know, Dante. You don't have to." She turned. It was not Dante. Travis Miller stood in the doorway, framed against the dark hall. He was a nightmare brought to life. He was gaunt, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his clothes soaked and muddy. He was a different man, a man who had been hollowed out by his own rage and stripped of his identity. He was a rabid dog, and he had a gun. "Travis," she breathed, her hand flying to her throat. The room, the air, her blood. Everything froze. "Hello, Lena," he hissed, his voice a wet, ragged sound. "You like this? The big house? The fancy clothes? You think you're better than me now?" He had bypassed the security. A cop. He knew how. The storm, the generator switching, the old service entrance. He had planned this. How did you find me?" "I followed you," he shrieked, taking a step in, the gun shaking in his hand. "I've been watching. I watched you learn to drive. I watched you go to his mother's house. I watched you become this thing that you're not." "Travis, put the gun down," Lena said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. "It's over. It's over when I say it's over," he screamed, his face contorting. "You ruined me. You and him. You took my job, my life." "You did that," Lena said, her newfound strength surfacing. "You did this to yourself." His face darkened with a fury so profound it was almost black. "Bitch." He lunged for her. Lena didn't freeze. She ran. She threw a heavy book, a lamp, anything, and scrambled for the other door. "Dante!" she screamed, a full-throated, terrified sound. "Dante!" She ran into the hall, toward the kitchens, and remembered the old wine cellar. She fumbled with the heavy, iron latch on the door, threw it open, and tumbled down the stone steps into the cold, damp darkness. She hid behind a massive rack of wine, her breath coming in sobs, her body trembling. She heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, thudding on the stone above. He was in the cellar. "Come on, Lena," he crooned, his voice echoing in the small space. Where's your rich boyfriend now? You think he can protect you down here? It's just you. And me. Like old times. She saw his shadow. He was at the end of the aisle. He turned. He saw her. His teeth were bared in a triumphant, sick grin. Found you. He raised the gun, just as Lena screamed. A sound not human, a roar of pure, elemental rage echoed from the stairs. Dante Morelli appeared. He was not a man. He was a force of nature. He had moved so fast. Lena hadn't even seen him. Travis turned, his eyes wide, and fired the gun. The sound was deafening. A cannon in the small space. The bullet went wild, shattering a row of priceless French wine. Showering the floor in glass and red, Dante didn't even flinch. He was on Travis. His hand, a steel trap, clamped down on Travis's wrist. There was a sound, a wet, sickening snap. Travis screamed, a high-pitched animal wail, and the gun clattered to the floor. Dante's other hand, a fist, connected with Travis's jaw. The sound was like a bat hitting a side of beef. Travis went down, but Dante did not let him fall. He hauled him up by the front of his muddy jacket and slammed him against the stone wall. "You," Dante breathed, his voice a low, gravelly sound of pure hate. "Put your hands." He punctuated the word with a blow to Travis's stomach. On. Another blow. Hurt. He wasn't fighting Travis. He was dismantling him. It was cold. It was brutal. It was methodical. He was breaking him. Travis was a bloody, sobbing mess, sliding down the wall. Dante hauled him up again, his hands moving to Travis's throat, his thumbs pressing. "Dante!" Lena screamed, scrambling from her hiding place. "Dante, no! Stop, please!" He was choking him. Travis's face was turning a deep, awful purple, his feet kicking uselessly. "Dante!" she shrieked, grabbing his arm, his bicep a band of iron. "Please don't, he's not worth it, don't do this, for me, please." For a second, she thought he wouldn't. He was gone, lost to a rage she could not reach, and then he stopped, his hands still trembling with the force of his fury. Loosened, he let Travis drop. The man fell to the floor, a boneless, whimpering, bloody heap, gasping and choking on the stone. Dante turned, his chest heaving, his gray eyes black with adrenaline. He looked at the mess on the floor. Then he walked over and kicked the gun, skittering it across the floor, away from the man. He looked down at Travis, his breathing slowing, his control, his iron will, slamming back into place. "She asked me not to kill you," Dante said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "So you live." He crouched, grabbing a handful of Travis's hair, yanking his head up. "But you will crawl from now on. You will never see the sun again. You will live the rest of your pathetic life in a box, remembering this, remembering that she was the one who showed you mercy." He threw Travis's head back against the floor. Sirens, faint but growing closer. "Nico, the security system, he's..." "The police," Lena stammered. "He's a trespasser," Dante said, walking to her, his hands bloody. "He's a kidnapper. He fired a weapon at you. He is nothing. This time, there is no badge." The police arrived. This time, they did not see Officer Miller. They saw a deranged, armed intruder covered in blood and the wealthy, powerful, and utterly calm owner of the estate who had defended his home and the woman he loved. This time, no badge could save him. They were back at the penthouse. It had been 2 days. The storm had passed. The city was quiet. Lena stood in the bedroom, the city lights a soft, glittering carpet below. She was standing by the window, the red dress she had worn for him, pooled at her feet. She was tired, but it was a good tired. The tired of a battle won. She heard him enter the room. She felt his presence, a warm, solid weight. She was naked, and she was not afraid. She turned to him, her body pale in the moonlight, the scars on her ribs so faint they were almost invisible. She was healed. "Do you still want to see the truth?" she asked softly, a small, confident smile on her face. Dante walked toward her. He did not look at her body with hunger, but with reverence. He had fought for this. He had fought for her to be this whole. He reached her, his hands, clean now, coming up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You," he whispered, his gray eyes holding hers, no longer cold, but filled with a fire that was all for her. "You are the truth." He kissed her, and it was not the kiss of a desperate, broken woman. It was not the kiss of a patient, waiting man. It was the kiss of two equals, two survivors. It was slow and deep and promised a lifetime of sunrises. And when he lifted her, carrying her to the bed, it was not a rescue. It was a homecoming. The next morning, they stood on the balcony. The sun was just beginning to edge over the city, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and brilliant, hopeful gold. She was in his shirt, her hair a messy tangle. He was in his suit pants and a white shirt, his own jacket and tie long forgotten. Her scars, both the ones on her skin and the ones on her soul, were fading. His hands, scarred and strong, held hers. Lena looked out at the city, at the world that had once been her prison, and she took a deep, clean breath. She was no longer hiding. And Dante Morelli, the man who had been a king of shadows, the man who had built a fortress of stone and silence, was no longer alone. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Dante. We would love to know where in the world you're listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and survival. Your support means everything to us, and we cannot wait to read your thoughts in the comments.